welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. As always, we have a packed show for you, and our big focus continues to be on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's historic visit to Poland and Ukraine. No solution can be found on the battlefield. This is not an era of war. This important message vis-a-vis the Russia-Ukraine conflict resonated in Warsaw today, just weeks after Prime Minister Narendra Modi said this to Russian President Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin in Moscow. Prime Minister Modi is on a two-day historic visit to Poland, the first visit to the European country by an Indian Prime Minister in 45 years. During his talks with the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk in capital Warsaw, Prime Minister Modi today said, "The conflicts in Ukraine and West Asia are of deep concern to all of us. India firmly believes that no solution to any problem can be found on the battlefield." Both Prime Ministers called for an end to the ongoing wars. Earlier, Mr. Modi held talks with Tusk at the Chancellery in Warsaw following a ceremonial welcome. At the joint press briefing following the talks, the two leaders announced the upgradation of the India-Poland relationship to a strategic partnership. Calling for more trade and investments, Mr. Modi urged Poland to be part of the Make in India initiative to manufacture goods in India to export to the world. Tusk appreciated Prime Minister Modi's stance on the Ukraine conflict and said India has an important role to play in defusing the crisis. Prime Minister Modi reiterated that India remains committed to playing a role in the restoration of peace. Mr. Modi said, "In any crisis, the loss of innocent lives is the biggest challenge for humanity. We support dialogue and diplomacy for the restoration of peace and stability at the earliest. For such purposes, India is willing to support all possible efforts along with friendly nations." On his part, Donald Tusk said Prime Minister Modi was committed to the immediate resolution of the conflict in Ukraine. The Polish Prime Minister said Prime Minister Modi has confirmed that he is committed to the peaceful, just and immediate stoppage of war in Ukraine. "We believe India can play an important and positive role, and this declaration is very important." Tusk also wished Prime Minister Modi well for his visit to Ukraine, saying, "Mr. Prime Minister, you will undertake a 10-hour journey to Ukraine. I'm confident it will be historic." Prime Minister Modi's visit to Ukraine will be the first visit to the war-torn country by an Indian Prime Minister since diplomatic ties were established between the two countries 30 years ago. Of course, the visit assumes great significance, coming as it does in the middle of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. This is a critical point in the war, as both Ukraine and Russia are cutting deeper into each other's territories. Remember, it was in 2022, months after the war erupted, when Prime Minister Modi had first told President Putin, "This is not an era of war." Words that then resonated globally and were repeated today in Warsaw. Addressing the Indian diaspora in the Polish capital, Prime Minister Modi also said that for decades India had a policy of maintaining distance from all countries. However, the policy of today's India is to remain close to all countries. He went on to say, "Empathy is one of the identities of Indians. Whenever any trouble mounts in any country, India is the first country to extend help. When COVID came, India said humanity first. India helps citizens of other countries. India believes in Buddha's tradition, therefore believes in peace, not war. India is an advocate of peace in this region, and it is clear that this is not a time for war. We need to be together to fight challenges." India focuses on diplomacy and dialogue. Mr. Modi also lauded the Indian community for helping Indian students who were stuck in Ukraine when the war erupted in 2022. He also thanked the Polish government for opening doors for Indian students and removing visa restrictions at the time. All eyes will now be on Prime Minister Modi's day-long visit to the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, on Friday. Mr. Modi, who is visiting Ukraine at the invitation of President Volodymyr Zelensky, has said he will share with the Ukrainian leader his perspective on a peaceful resolution of the ongoing conflict. As we said, Prime Minister Modi is visiting Ukraine nearly 6 weeks after his high-profile visit to Russia, which triggered criticism from the United States, some of its Western allies, as well as Ukrainian President Zelensky himself. In fact, in a very strongly worded statement, Zelensky had said then, "It's a huge disappointment and a devastating blow to peace efforts to see the leader of the world's largest democracy hug the world's most bloody criminal in Moscow on such a day." Prime Minister Modi's visit happened to coincide with the Russian strike on Ukraine's largest children's hospital that left many dead. During his talks with Putin at the Kremlin the next day, Prime Minister Modi told the Russian president, Whether it's a war, conflict, or a terror attack, any person who believes in humanity is pained when there is a loss of lives. And when innocent children are killed, the heart bleeds, and that pain is terrifying. So what happens when Prime Minister Modi meets with the Ukrainian president in Kiev? Can India play a mediator and peace broker between the two warring nations?
2025 में पोलैंड यूरोपियन यूनियन की अध्यक्षता संभालेगा। मुझे विश्वास है कि आपके सहयोग से भारत और ईयू के संबंधों को बल मिलेगा। फ्रेंड, यूक्रेन और पश्चिम एशिया में चल रहे संघर्ष हम सभी के लिए गहरी चिंता का विषय है। भारत का यह दृढ़ विश्वास है कि किसी भी समस्या का समाधान रणभूमि में नहीं हो सकता। किसी भी संकट में मासूम लोगों की जान की हानि पूरी मानवता के लिए सबसे बड़ी चुनौती बन गई है। हम शांति और स्थिरता की जल्द से जल्द बहाली के लिए डायलॉग और डिप्लोमेसी का समर्थन करते हैं। इसके लिए भारत अपने मित्र देशों के साथ मिलकर हर संभव सहयोग देने के लिए तैयार है। फ्रेंड्स, पोलैंड में इंडोलॉजी और संस्कृत का बहुत पुराना और समृद्ध ट्रेडिशन रहा है। भारतीय सभ्यता और भाषाओं में गहरी रुचि से हमारे संबंधों की मजबूत नींव रखी गई है। हमारे गहरे पीपल टू पीपल टाइज का एक प्रत्यक्ष और जीवंत उदाहरण कल मैंने देखा। इंडियन पोल्स के दोबरे महाराजा और कोल्हापुर के महाराज की याद में बनाए गए मॉन्यूमेंट्स पर मुझे श्रद्धांजलि देने का सौभाग्य मिला। मुझे खुशी है कि आज भी पोलैंड के लोग उनके परोपकार और उदारता का सम्मान करते हैं। उनकी स्मृति को अमर करने के लिए हम भारत और पोलैंड के बीच जाम साहब ऑफ नवानगर यूथ एक्सचेंज प्रोग्राम शुरू करने जा रहे हैं। हर वर्ष पोलैंड के 20 युवाओं को भारत यात्रा पर लेकर जाया जाएगा। फ्रेंड्स, मैं एक बार फिर प्रधानमंत्री टस्क और उनकी मित्रता के लिए हृदय से आभार प्रकट करता हूं और हमारे संबंधों को नए स्तर पर ले जाने के लिए अपनी प्रतिबद्धता दोहराता हूं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
प्रधानमंत्री जी, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आपकी वॉर्सो में उपस्थिति के लिए। और निस्संदेह ये इस बात का प्रमाण है कि हमारे दोनों देश के बीच संबंध बेहतर होते जा रहे हैं। ये पूरे क्षेत्र के लिए बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है और ये अतिशयोक्ति नहीं होगी अगर मैं पूरे विश्व को ये कहूं कि ये जो बेहतर संबंध हैं पोलैंड और भारत के बीच, ये हमारे लिए बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है कि हम अपने जो पारंपरिक अच्छे संबंध हैं पोलैंड और भारत के बीच, इनको मैं रेखांकित करूं। हमारे देशों के बीच में कोई विवाद नहीं है, कोई संघर्ष नहीं है। हम एक दूसरे को अच्छी तरह से समझते हैं। भौगोलिक दूरी के बावजूद और अलग अलग परंपराओं और इतिहास के बावजूद हम एक दूसरे को अच्छी तरह से समझते हैं।
All right, so how significant was this two-day visit to Poland and how critical will be the visit to Kiev that comes up tomorrow on Friday? All eyes will be on what happens when Prime Minister Modi meets with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who has invited him to his country, and remember, who was also very critical of Prime Minister Modi's meeting with the Russian president in Moscow 6 weeks ago. That is a big question that everyone is looking at very closely. We're going to put it to our panel of experts in just a moment after this quick break on Global Lens.
Hey, careful, huh? My daddy got it from abroad. Hey, disaster! How will you pay for the loss now?
In stock market, you should take risk as per your capacity and knowledge. Trade in options very carefully.
Wow, Dikra! Absolutely perfect. Take risk with full understanding.
So much good, invest good.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface but not the living people?
मैं नरेंद्र दामोदर दास मोदी
Terrorism always flows like water. It will go in the direction where there is no obstacle.
Bloodbath in Jammu. 5 soldiers die after terrorists open fire at an army convoy in Kathua.
Pakistan essentially is doing is opening a new frontier in the Jammu region.
This and more. Streaming on News9 plus news is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and we're discussing Prime Minister Narendra Modi's historic visit to Poland and to Ukraine. That is the big one that's coming up tomorrow. Let's introduce our guest. Joining me on the show tonight is Dr. Swasti Rao, an associate fellow at the IDSA. She's also an expert on Russia-Ukraine affairs. Ambassador Suresh Goel, former Indian diplomat, is also with us, and completing the panel tonight will be Manoj Joshi, distinguished fellow at the ORF, who we are hoping will join us in a couple of minutes. All right, Dr. Swasti Rao, if I could start with you. You know, if anybody thought that it was incorrect to look at Prime Minister Modi's visit to Poland through the prism of just the Ukraine war, they may well have been proven wrong given the statements that have emanated from Warsaw today. We once again heard Prime Minister Modi's famous words, "This is not an era of war. No solution can be found on the battlefield." These are words that he had conveyed to President Putin just last month. Later, the Prime Minister of India said the conflicts in Ukraine and West Asia are of deep concern to all of us. And In any crisis, the loss of innocent lives is the biggest challenge for humanity. We support dialogue and diplomacy for the restoration of peace and stability. For such purposes, India is willing to support all possible efforts along with friendly nations. And interestingly, even the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk acknowledged India's role, possible role in this conflict resolution when he said, Prime Minister Modi has confirmed that he is committed to the peaceful, just and immediate stoppage of war in Ukraine. We believe India can play an important and positive role. This declaration is very important. And then while addressing the Prime Minister directly, Donald Tusk said, Mr. Prime Minister, you will undertake a 10-hour journey to Ukraine. I'm confident it will be historic. Therefore, whether anyone likes it or not, even the Poland visit, as important as it may be on its own, it really does seem to be a reflection of India's stance largely on the Ukraine conflict and how Prime Minister Modi is trying to take forward India's efforts in pushing for peace, dialogue and diplomacy, however challenging it may have proven to be, given that the war has now gone on for 2.5 years.
Right. A good evening to you, Neha. And first of all, I think we must congratulate everybody in India, the team India, and of course in Poland for having a new strategic partnership with Poland. So this is no small feat, considering the fact that we have had historic ties with Poland. We have had very old and very strong ties with Poland right from the Soviet times. And of course, after that, there was a lull. But, the Polish people love Indians. And I'm sure you were able to see in so many of these instances, which were aired day and night on different channels and on social media, that the palpable excitement was all over the place in Poland with respect to the Prime Minister visit, not only in the Indian diaspora, but also the whole host of Indologists and, people who love Indian culture, who do Indian politics, etc. So I think this is a moment of a lot of great importance to India-Poland bilateral ties, which are now a strategic partnership. So that should stand on their own. Now, despite that, I would say that, yes, coming to Ukraine, there is no denying the fact that the Ukraine war is the context and is the major elephant in the room that needs to be addressed. And I think nobody, not in Poland, not in India, not in Ukraine, has shied away from actually addressing it. In fact, if you carefully see the statements made by all the high-level delegations from Ukraine, so the two deputy foreign ministers that have come to India in the last 2 years and Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, every single time you had anybody from Ukraine, they underscored that the importance of India and the role India can play in the mediation efforts. So I think this is a writing on the wall which needs to be addressed and which is getting addressed. Okay, so let's just sort of take a moment to appreciate that, yes, there is the due attention to these facts. Now, taking it further, if you ask me where exactly this is going tomorrow when the Prime Minister finally reaches there after a 10-hour long train journey, to Kyiv, I don't really expect a total mediation to work. I think if you carefully saw what Mr. Tanmay Lal said in the MEA briefing, he also made it clear that a final kind of a negotiation or mediation is not really possible right now, because if you see the war, it has entered into a different kind of a kinetic phase. So you have Russia doubling down in the Donbas region, especially the town of Pokrovsk, and Ukraine making this invasion deeper into Russia with about 1,200 square kilometer of territory now in Ukrainian control with 92 settlements. So this is really not the right time for a ceasefire or a negotiation. But eventually, I do see that both the sides are trying to ready their best bets for a likely negotiation, which in my opinion should be happening sometime around perhaps Donald Trump coming back in the White House, so maybe November. And that would be a time when I think India's role would be much solicited. So India's going there, Prime Minister Modi taking this initiative, of course, is a classic balancing act. I mean, nobody can take that away. He's gone to Russia, he's going to, now he's going to Ukraine. But at the same time, this also is a reiteration that Ukraine-India ties stand on their own. Ukraine-Russia ties stand on their own. So this process of dehyphenation, which is much required, is underway. The Prime Minister himself doing it, himself taking the initiative, has also, really put it out in the foreground. So that there is no confusion in terms of how India is looking at its multifaceted cooperation with Ukraine. And on the other hand, also reinforcing India's image as the bridge, between these two warring parties that they would rely on, especially when the negotiations. Yeah.
Can India act as that bridge? It's interesting, you're talking about how there's been a de-hyphenation, that India has independent ties with Russia on the one hand and Ukraine on the other, but at the same time, I think we can all agree that Prime Minister Modi's visit to Ukraine is being seen by most as a balancing act, given that he visited Moscow just about 6 weeks ago. Before I go across to my other guests, let's cut across to a press conference that's currently being addressed by the Ministry of External Affairs in Warsaw.
1,000 Polish women and children, and also in Kolhapur. Prime Minister also visited laid a wreath at the monument of the Battle of Monte Cassino, where both Indian and Polish troops had fought together, and this was also a very special moment. Yesterday evening there was a community event where the Prime Minister met members of the Indian diaspora, who welcomed him very enthusiastically and with great warmth. This morning there was a ceremonial welcome at the Chancellery, followed by first a restricted meeting and then the delegation level talks. Prime Minister Modi also laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier, and this was followed by the call on the President. Prime Minister has also been meeting some of the business leaders from Poland who have business presence in India. The action plan that has been agreed to focuses on various aspects of our cooperation. For instance, in the political dialogue and security cooperation, how to catalyze the trade and investment, areas like climate, energy, mining, science and technology, transport and connectivity, the fight against terrorism, cybersecurity, health, and people-to-people ties and cultural cooperation. These are the bilateral elements, and then there is a reference to the India-EU relations. So both sides agreed for the need for regular high-level contacts, strengthening the economic relations in a range of sectors, ranging from agriculture, food processing, clean technology, connectivity, mining, renewable energy, and AI and digital areas.
All right, an MA press conference there in Warsaw at the end of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Poland. There is one more engagement. He's going to meet with business leaders in Warsaw before he departs for Ukraine. Let me now go across to my panel ambassador, Suresh Goel. You heard briefly that press conference there. Yes, the MA has outlined the various areas of bilateral engagement that came up in talks between the two sides in Warsaw today, whether it's trade and investment or, cooperation in the energy sector, what have you. And of course, as was mentioned by Dr. Swasti Rao, that the two sides have in fact taken the relationship to the level of a strategic partnership. Those are certainly key takeaways. But do you not believe that at the end of the day, the Poland visit by Prime Minister Modi is going to continue being seen in the context squarely of the Ukraine conflict, given that most of the important statements that were made by the two leaders today were around that conflict, with the Polish Prime Minister even expressing the hope that India can act as an honest peace broker between the two warring nations?
Neha, thank you very much, first of all. And let me start very, very starkly and very honestly. And I think you know me by now. I'm not going to miss my words. First of all, I think I would like to compliment Dr. Swasti Rao for presenting an excellent brief on what is happening between India and Poland and India and Ukraine, etc., etc. Excellent brief on the relations and the way they are going. But Neha, you will forgive me if I don't agree with you that Poland, we are looking at the relations of Poland through the lens of Ukraine. I have a different take on this. Number one, the relations between India and Poland from the bilateral angle apart, really speaking, but the very fact, please note that that when the Prime Minister goes to Poland, he travels to Ukraine in the Rail Force One from Warsaw to Kyiv, illustrating the kind of connectivity that exists between Poland and Ukraine. Poland is the first Central European country which became member of NATO. Poland is driving the connections between Europe, West, and Central Europe. In that sense, Prime Minister Poland is a good thing. Relations between India and Poland to Central Europe, clearly illustrating that anything that happens in Central Europe, either in terms of security metrics, strategic relationship, geopolitics, Poland has to be part of it. Please do remember that even during the beginning of the Ukraine war, it was Poland which actually was facing the brunt of all the consequences. The students from India, when they were evacuated, they had to travel to Poland. They were there. The arms which are going to Ukraine again went through Poland. There were many attacks on Poland itself, on the border, during the war in Ukraine. And therefore, I think we must remember that Poland, as an important member of Central Europe, as an important member of NATO, is central to the security of Central Europe. That's number one. Number two, in terms of what actually the Prime Minister said for Ukraine, I think we must remember one thing, that it was a problem of the European security. Unless we are able to resolve the issue of the European security, unless we are able to find a place in that European security as to where NATO is going to be, how is the Russian security going to be defined in that, we are not going to find a solution. And
Well, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, sir, but we seem to be having a problem with your link. The audio is not very clear. We'll try and fix it, though. I'm hoping that, you know, the viewers got the gist of what you were saying there. I will come back to you in a moment, but let me take this to Manoj Joshi. Manoj Joshi, there is no doubt that, you know, this was the first visit to Poland by an Indian Prime Minister in 45 years, marking 70 years of bilateral ties between the two countries. Today, the two sides declared that this is now going to be a strategic partnership, which is certainly an upgrade of ties. But, you know, how this visit to Poland should be viewed has been a matter of much debate in recent days. In your assessment, this visit by Prime Minister Modi to Poland, is it India seeking stronger ties with an emerging power in Central Europe, given its expanding influence both in geopolitical terms and economic terms? Or is this really India trying to send out a stronger message on its stance on the Ukraine conflict? How do you see it?
Well, I think both issues, I'd look at it from the perspective, at one level, it is India stepping out in its relationship with Central and Eastern Europe. That's an area which has been neglected by Indian policy. Now, of course, the opportunity has come because of the Ukraine crisis, meaning the primary purpose of the Prime Minister's visit to the area was in relation to the Ukraine crisis and was in relation to visiting Ukraine. But Poland happens to be a kind of a frontline state when it comes to that war. It has been the prime supporter of Ukraine in the war. It has been the recipient of all the refugees. I think something like 1.5 million Ukrainians are living in Poland. And the Poles are the strongest supporters of Ukraine in this. So to answer your question, it's a mix of both. So it is definitely a major step by India to show its presence in Central and Eastern Europe. Now, this was an area where in the last 10 years, we have seen China taking a lot of strides. The Chinese had created a 17+1 grouping of Central and Eastern European countries which they were operating through them. But after the Ukraine war, that grouping has become more or less redundant. And I think India senses an opportunity there to build ties. And I think Poland, in the visit to Poland in that sense, is a kind of a stepping stone towards Central and Eastern Europe. But as I said, the main purpose, the main reason why he's there is Ukraine. And his visit to Ukraine will be the one that we need to watch carefully.
Nuanced perspective on the significance of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Poland, and as we said, all eyes will now be on what happens next in Kiev, as that is Prime Minister Modi's next destination. What message is he going to carry to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who's invited the Indian Prime Minister to Ukraine? I need to take a quick break here on Global Lens. We'll continue this conversation on the other side.
Fast.
My God, isn't she your daughter?
Yes.
She's playing football. This is boys' game. Make her study. If she doesn't get a good job, she will get a good match. Will you win the world by playing football?
Yes, auntie. My daughter will win the world by playing football.
Let's go to Germany.
World's largest football talent hunt, News9 Indian Tigers and Tigresses. In association with DFB Pokal, Bundesliga, BBB and India Football Center. Train and play matches in Europe. Register now and fly to Germany. IndianTigersandTigresses.com.
Big fan of Ian Bell, watching him very classy in all formats.
I find Durban quite a challenge, which is still an enjoyable one.
You're not allowed to bowl a bouncer, so that tells you that they want to see runs on the board.
बड़े अच्छे टूर्स किए हैं, बड़ी अच्छी यादें हैं हर जगह की, जहां मैंने पर्सनली क्रिकेट को बहुत एंजॉय किया, ऑस्ट्रेलिया एंड इंडिया में बहुत ज़्यादा एंजॉय किया.
I love playing again England and India, and they were both very different challenges.
Up close and personal with legendary cricketers like never before. Icons of the pitch.
This and more. Streaming on News9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Why is the state not looking at putting an embargo on that?
As a Telangana person, I will not accept.
How do ordinary folks deal with this?
So I'm Payal Nath, the CEO and director of Kadam Heart. We're working with people, we're working with emotions, we're working with hands, we're working with nature. We are very clear, we want to commit to livelihoods, we want to commit to the planet, we want to impact 1 million artisans, which is 1 million families minimum. Be the change that you want to see.
This and more. Streaming on News9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. We've got very interesting perspectives from our guests on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Poland. We're now going to shift our focus to his upcoming visit to Ukraine, which will be watched closely around the world. Okay, let me start with Dr. Swasti Rao. Dr. Rao, I want to quickly remind our viewers of something that happened a few weeks ago. As you're well aware, when Prime Minister Modi was in Moscow meeting President Putin just about 6 weeks ago, There was a very angry reaction, and may I say an outburst from the Ukrainian president, and he tweeted, and I'm quoting him here, "It's a huge disappointment and a devastating blow to peace efforts to see the leader of the world's largest democracy hug the world's most bloody criminal in Moscow on such a day." The reference was to a day when there was a Russian strike on Ukraine's largest children's hospital that had left many dead. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister's visit to Moscow coincided with that attack. The next day, during his talks with Putin at the Kremlin, Prime Minister Modi told the Russian president in no uncertain terms, and I'm quoting him here, "Whether it's war, conflict or a terrorist attack, any person who believes in humanity is pained when there is a loss of lives, and when innocent children are killed, the heart bleeds and the pain is terrifying." My question to you is simply this. This visit comes on the invitation of President Zelensky. The question on everyone's mind is, what can we expect? I think it's pretty safe to assume that the same message of peace, dialogue and diplomacy that India has been at pains to take to both the warring nations and the world repeatedly over the last 2 years is the message that Prime Minister Modi is going to carry to the Ukrainian president as well when he meets him in Kiev. The question really is, what kind of a role do you think India really can play here? The Polish Prime Minister seems to have expressed a great deal of optimism. Yes, India is one country, one among a handful of countries that enjoys friendly ties with both Ukraine and Russia, and multiple attempts have been made by Prime Minister Modi, no less, to reach out to the presidents of both these countries. And yet here we are. The war has gone on for more than 2.5 years. What do you think can really change with Prime Minister Modi's visit to Kiev? It can't be just about signaling, is it?
Well, I mean, the signaling is there, the messaging is there, right? As you rightly pointed out, that India's role as an actor, as a country that is committed to peace, India's role as a mediator, I think is accepted by one and all. So I wouldn't really overstate that. It's already there. The question is the timing right? In the war, in the kinetic warfare, the level at which the war has entered, the intensification of the war that we have seen after the first week of August, do you think that the time is right? And that's where we have to make a little bit of distinction, Neha, between total mediation and limited mediation. I have been talking about it, I think, at your show also. I've mentioned that we need to distinguish that perhaps the time is not right for a complete mediation to work. And that is the reason why the MEA was extremely categorical when it pointed out that we are not really looking for a final negotiation or a settlement right now, even though the messaging will be there. There's no two ways about it. On the contrary, what would make more sense, because that's your question to me, right, is that then what should we expect? So we should expect basically 2-3 things. One is that we should be expecting the role of limited mediation. Don't forget that in the second peace summit, which happened in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, there were certain working groups which were formed when Shri Ajit Doval was representing India, and these working groups were around specific issues. Okay, so I think there would be meaningful conversation with India with respect to how to improve the performance of those working groups, what really to add, what mandate to add, etc. Okay, on prisoners of exchange of prisoners of war, on saving the children's and hospitals and those kind of things. So so the basic distinction that I'm trying to make here is between total mediation and limited mediation. Okay, so I think limited mediation is going to make more sense right now. The second thing, of course, that nobody's talking about is that the Prime Minister has also gone there, and MEA has actually said that in its briefing that it is not just about the mediation and the mediation efforts. The ties between India and Ukraine also stand on their own. For example, Neha, I don't know how many people in India know that Bharat Forge actually acquired a 51% stake in the Indian arm of the Ukrainian firm Zorya, and Zorya is the one that makes the gas turbine power plants. And when this acquisition happened? This acquisition happened in January 2024. So what I'm trying to indicate at is that technical military cooperation with Ukraine has been going on. Before the war, it was thriving in many ways. Ukraine was a major, I would say, actor in India's diversification and Make in India and all of that, and the upgradation of Soviet era equipment. So Ukraine was already playing a very important role. The AN-32 transport aircrafts that we have, and a huge fleet at that. Ukraine was already in talks for modernizing them. So that has been going on. What has happened after the war is that while the technical military cooperation has continued, but the details of which have gone classified, and for understandable reasons. So what I really do expect now that the Prime Minister is going there is that we would expect more technical military cooperation, even if the big ticket announcements are not made, or even if there are no big ticket announcements, because we have to look at it in an incremental fashion. So it is important for us to realize that apart from the mediation efforts and India's role as a country that is committed to humanitarian aid, etc., we also have bilateral ties that are basically based on India's national interest. And here, I mean the defense industry cooperation. And last point here is that I think what not many people understand, that India has had a very important vertical of providing humanitarian aid to Ukraine. We have already given 16 consignments of humanitarian aid. And I think now the time is right to also discuss the viability of how the Indian firms, whether it's the public firms or the private firms, going to invest in the reconstruction of Ukraine. Because when we do that, there are different mechanisms we have. We have a line of credit system. We have a triangular cooperation mechanism with other third countries. So these kind of things would really make a lot of sense, because let's not forget that at the end of all this, whether it's outreach to Poland or reach out to Ukraine, or before this Prime Minister went to Austria. End of the day, you have to understand that Europe right now is in a great transformative transition, and India's role needs to be substantiated in stabilizing the European order, whether it is a security order or it is the economic order. And then that also entails its role in the Indo-Pacific. And all of this is in India's national interest. So you have to take that kind of a comprehensive view when you're trying to understand and make sense of what to expect from these standalone visits. Back to you, Neha.
Fair enough. All fair points. And, especially the one about how India can play a constructive role in the reconstruction of war-ravished Ukraine. I think that also is a very important point. Let me take this back to Ambassador Goel. Ambassador Goel, Dr. Swasti Rao makes an interesting point about limited mediation as opposed to just mediation. Now, yes, the Ukrainian president has said time and again, we want India to help us in this peace process. Ukraine invited India to attend the peace summit in Switzerland. Yes, the Polish prime minister has expressed hope that India can make a difference and push the two sides towards the negotiating table. It is true that for 2.5 years now, India has been pushing for peace, dialogue and diplomacy, repeatedly sending out messages to the presidents of both countries, telling Prime Minister Modi, conveying these important messages to them in person, regularly picking up the phone and talking to them. But really, with the two sides digging their heels in, apart from talking about how India can help with the reconstruction of Ukraine and some of the bilateral issues that have been outlined by Dr. Swasti Rao, the question is, as far as the conflict itself is concerned, what can India really do?
Neha, am I clear now? I mean, last time when I spoke,
it's better, sir. Yes.
My audio was not very clear. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And
you're audible now.
One or two things, very, very briefly. I, frankly speaking, I'm an old man. I began to work in the Foreign Service in 1978. And at that time, we knew what mediation meant. But there was no concept of a limited mediation. Either there was pregnancy or there was no pregnancy. There was no half pregnancy as such. I'm sorry to use the word like this, but the fact is, mediation is mediation.
Either you're pregnant or you're not. You can't be half pregnant. Okay.
So mediation has to be either mediation or no mediation. And I don't think in this particular case, mediation is a possibility here because of the situation that exists on the ground between Ukraine and Russia and the interests which are involved here from USA and Western Europe, NATO countries. There are huge interests here really, and also the commercial military industrial complex interests. And therefore, I will not even talk of the mediation really, the possibility of mediation that India can succeed in here. But the point really here is what can India play a role in the reconstruction? Have you even thought about the kind of a bill, the expenditure bill that the reconstruction effort will entail in Ukraine? Who's going to finance it? And the financing will come from where? Western Europe? USA? If they are going to be financing the reconstruction effort, Ukraine has no money. Let's be clear about that. If Ukraine has no money in terms of reconstruction, then why would the USA and Europe, even though their companies may actually charge a huge amount more than in terms of building the infrastructure, why would they actually push their companies in Ukraine? So I think essentially what we're talking about here is not reconstruction. We are not talking about really where Ukraine and you said NATO would be. But basically, India trying to assert a role for itself in the whole situation as a leader of the global south, as a country which is an interest in peace, basically because most, Swati mentioned about the defense deals and the defense components and our own defense industry. But basically, our own situation in terms of development would depend a lot upon peace coming between Ukraine and Russia. But I think really that is not going to happen pretty soon, at least not till January, when the new president in the USA takes over.
That's interesting. That's interesting. If there is a change, of guard in terms of parties in the White House, that could have a significant impact on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Manu Joshi, wrap up this discussion for us. I want to ask you two quick questions. Number one, even as everyone seems to express so much hope and optimism about India's constructive role in pushing for peace, dialogue and diplomacy, what can India really do in this scenario? And how do you think Washington and Moscow will be looking at Prime Minister Modi's visit to Kiev?
Well, I'll be very frank with you. As of now, there is a full-scale war going on between Ukraine and Russia, meaning, in fact, the war is intensifying. So is this a moment, and I think the issue of timing was raised by Dr. Rao, is this the time when some kind of a mediation effort can go through? I have my doubts. Also, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of leverage does India have with Moscow and with Kiev? With Moscow, we have good offices, we have good relations with Moscow, but there is a limit to which we can push Russia. And as far as Kiev is concerned, we don't have that much leverage. Meaning we are trying to build up that leverage, but as of now, we don't have that kind of leverage. So at best, I think right now, Sureshji spoke about the question of mediation. My own feeling is that it's not mediation. At this stage, we can facilitate, we can carry messages from one side to the other and try to see how it works. Because at the end of the day, as far as this conflict is concerned, this is something which has to be worked out, whether through back channels or whatever it is, between Moscow and Washington, D.C. These are the two key players in this, and their influence is what is going to make the difference. India can at best facilitate, and I think because we have, as you can see, our Prime Minister can shake hands with Zelensky, and he can shake hands with Putin, he can hug Putin. So in those circumstances, we can play a major role as a facilitator, as a kind of neutral party to this conflict.
Okay, carrying of messages is something that India has been doing almost since the beginning of this war. Unfortunately, that hasn't really yielded any results so far, but then that really is the complex nature of this war. How will Moscow react to Prime Minister Modi's visit to Kiev is another interesting question. For now, all eyes on Prime Minister Modi's visit after that 10-hour long train journey to Kiev. What message will he have for President Zelensky? What message will President Zelensky have for India and Prime Minister Modi? On that note, Dr. Swasti Rao, Manoj Joshi, Ambassador Suresh Goyal, as always a pleasure having all of you on the show. Thank you for joining me on Global Lens tonight. Okay, let's now turn our attention to the United States and the upcoming presidential election. The Democratic National Convention has been underway in Chicago for 3 days now, and the latest big hitters to take center stage were former President Bill Clinton, the legendary talk show host Oprah Winfrey, and vice presidential candidate Tim Walz. Interestingly, a joy strategy portraying Vice President Kamala Harris as the candidate who can move the nation forward was on full display. Former President Bill Clinton said Harris brings sheer joy to the 2024 race. Oprah Winfrey urged Americans to choose joy. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg contrasted Trump's darkness with the brand of politics offered by Harris and her running mate Tim Walz, which she said just feels better to be part of. The message underscores how rapidly the 2024 presidential race has evolved since last month's exit of President Joe Biden, whose campaign had been built around dire warnings that electing Trump would jeopardize democracy itself. Harris hasn't abandoned those warnings, but seems to have repackaged them in a more forward-looking message, emphasizing themes of freedom and joy. And well, the convention has seen plenty of song and dance too. This time, singer John Legend and drummer Sheila E. played Prince's Let's Go Crazy, and Stevie Wonder performed Higher Ground.
He had an improbable turn that made him president. And we were in the middle of a pandemic and an economic crash. He healed our sick and put the rest of us back to work. And he strengthened our alliances for peace and security. He stood up for Ukraine. He's trying desperately to get a ceasefire in the Middle East. And then he did something that's really hard for a politician to do. He voluntarily gave up political power. And George Washington knew that, and he did it. And he set the standard for us serving 2 terms before it was mandatory. It helped his legacy. And it will enhance Joe Biden's legacy.
Let us choose. Let us choose truth. Let us choose honor. And let us choose joy. Because that's the best of America. But more than anything else, let us choose freedom. Why? Because that's the best of America. We're all Americans, and together, let's all choose Kamala Harris. Thank you, Chicago. Thank you, America.
So there I was, a 40-something high school teacher with little kids, 0 political experience, and no money, running in a deep red district. But you know what? Never underestimate a public school teacher. Never. I represented my neighbors in Congress for 12 years, and I learned an awful lot. I learned how to work across the aisle on issues like growing the rural economies and taking care of veterans. And I learned how to compromise without compromising my values. Look, I know God, and this is personal for Gwen and I. If you've never experienced the hell that is infertility, I guarantee you, you know somebody who has. And I can remember praying each night for a phone call, the pit in your stomach when the phone had rang, and the absolute agony when we heard the treatments hadn't worked.
And as we wrap up this edition of Global Lens, let's get you some news from neighboring Pakistan. In Lahore, a man appeared in court facing serious charges of cyber terrorism. Pakistani national Farhan Asif has been accused of spreading false information on his clickbait website, Channel 3 Now, which is believed to have fueled anti-immigration riots all the way in Britain. The article in question falsely claimed that a Muslim asylum seeker was involved in a tragic knife attack on children in the United Kingdom. This misinformation reportedly ignited days of unrest across several English towns and cities, targeting mosques, hotels, housing asylum seekers and other properties. Asif, a 31-year-old software engineer with no journalism experience, was taken into custody for one day following his court appearance. Authorities in the UK have attributed the riots to the viral spread of this misinformation. The attack that occurred on the 29th of July in Southport resulted in the deaths of 3 girls. The individual charged with the attack, Axel Rudakubana, is a British national with Rwandan heritage. And now comes this Pakistani connection to the entire story. That's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. Thanks for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow, because we're going to bring you a complete lowdown on Prime Minister Modi's much anticipated visit to Ukraine.
Not quite lived up to their pre-tournament billing, delivering a series of less than convincing performances. With 2 draws and a solitary win.
Your son will be Messi. No studies, just football all day. Go, my son, go. Make my face shine through playing football.
Not only your face, but also the country's. I will conquer the world by playing football. Come, let's go to Germany!
World's largest football talent hunt, News9 Indian Tigers and Tigresses. In association with DFB Pokal, Bundesliga, BVB and India Football Center. Train and play matches in Europe. Register now and fly to Germany. IndianTigersandTigresses.com.
It's said that out of 7 diamonds across the world, 5 are cut and polished in India.
Don't forget, US is the largest consumer of polished diamonds and the diamond jewelry, and that has taken a big beating for multiple reasons, but largely because of the consumer spending going down on these items, and that's essentially what has hit the diamond industry.
We are at a brim where you see not just one but multiple very strong global brands coming out of India, and we will make a global mark, and I'm convinced about that.
This and more. Streaming on News9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Who am I?